The stud, Molly Malone's in Hollywood. Chico Rey Rocks.
Hi, I'm Chico Rey. Welcome to Chico Rey Rocks. Today's program is about blues into rock, how blues has influenced rock, and my guests today are Bubba, Mike Ritto, and my good friend Bernie Pershey. Bubba's a guitar player, Mike's been a DJ, announcer and host, and Bernie, one of the premier drummers of the world. Me, myself, I'm just a bass player. The definition of the blues, or how the blues has influenced rock, sometimes gets clouded. The English always get the big side of this, how Led Zeppelin, Jeff Beck, everybody, Cream.
Well, they brought it back here.
Yeah, but we brought it back here, as we were discussing before, you know, like Bubba. As a guitar player, where did your influence come playing the blues? What led you to be who you are as a player?
Well, I grew up in the 70s, and so I was listening to Led Zeppelin, Hendrix, ZZ Top, and I started learning, I taught myself how to playing that stuff. And I recall an older musician who was going to Fullerton College, taking jazz guitar, asked me, he liked my playing, and he said, "Who do you take lessons from?" And I said, "Nobody." And he said, "Well, who do you listen to?" And I told him, ZZ Top, Hendrix, Clapton, Cream. He said, "Oh, those are all just blues guys," because he was a jazz player. He said, "You should listen to Muddy Waters. You should listen to John Lee Hooker. That's what you like." And I didn't know who he was talking about. And I went to the record store and I found a Muddy Waters record. I found a John Lee Hooker record. I took him home and I listened to him. I listened to him over and over. And I said, wow, these guys are not just playing music or entertaining. This is real. This is like real, you know, deep. This was what they really felt.
The blues starts in the Delta in Mississippi, but drums weren't added till when?
Well, later on, the blues as a form was completed without a rhythm section. And it started, like you say, in Louisiana and the Mississippi Delta. And as it came up that cornucopia of the Mississippi River, it came up city by city by city. And as it became more urban, the other traditions that already existed there were added. So bass and drums came in later than the form itself, and they would come in the form of the players that lived there at that time. In an earlier time, every city had a more individualistic expression than they do now from mass media. So St. Louis would sound like St. Louis.
Right.
Kansas City would sound like Kansas City.
Texas would sound like Texas, right?
And then also from my experience, Chicago would sound like Chicago. And they brought up the rich tradition from down south, which is a gift to all of us.
Yeah.
Because that's the basic thing, is what a gift.
And Chess Records, you know, Chess Records, Leonard Chess, and the great records that were made on Chess. That was really the first, the start of the electric blues, as I like to say it.
There was a big flea market at Maxwell and Halstead on the south side of Chicago.
Right.
And it'd be on Sunday, and you'd sit there. There'd be about 8 blues bands playing. There'd be a blues band, and the Stolen Tires, and the blues band, the Stolen Radios, you know what I mean? And they would also be playing, but the community, as it came up, would still be there. There would be sets of tables, and I didn't realize, but I was talking to a fellow once, and this table would be fellas from this parish in Louisiana.
Right.
And this table would be, you know, the other people. So some of those associations came up north and mixed with the other musicians that were there.
And Mike, as a DJ, was the blues a taboo subject to play, or no?
Well, it's kind of embarrassing, and you mentioned it a little bit, but back then, when I heard Crossroads, I heard Little Red Rooster, I heard Backdoor Man,
Right.
that was rock and roll. I didn't know that those weren't original songs, to be
Right.
honest with you. Nobody did. Suddenly when we found out, we started listening to those earlier versions, and it was almost a culture shock because, you know, I mean, listen to the differences. They don't even hardly sound the same at all. I thought Clapton came up with this great song, Crossroads. And then I listened to the original one, and I'm going, oh my God, it started giving me chills. And I started reading about it, and Clapton himself said, hey, till I was 25, if you didn't know who Robert Johnson was, I wasn't even going to talk to you.
I went down to the crossroads, fell down on my knees. electrified it, right, Bubba? I mean, you know,
It's true.
They electrified it.
It's true, they electrified it. But remember this, you know, Muddy came out of the Delta.
Right.
You know, the earliest recordings were wax cylinder recordings of him playing on Hobson's cotton farm.
Right.
Right? And he was playing real traditional solo acoustic blues. Well, at some point, after playing the chicken shacks and the chitlin circuit, he went north to Chicago. He went where the money was.
Yeah.
And as he moved north and he got up there, he got himself a band, it became more electric. Even Muddy went electric.
But he probably didn't even think of that when he moved up there. Just all of a sudden there's guys there that are playing bass and playing drums and playing harmonica. And
Well, think of in the Mississippi Delta, nobody could afford drums and bass and all those other instruments.
Or even to plug an amp or electric guitar in. I mean,
that's why they
just
all
like,
played guitars were dirt cheap back then, and harmonicas. But at some point, you want to go where the money's at. Now you're going to need a band.
The thing that really gets it to me is that, you know, these two guys, Alexis Corner and John Mayall, as we all know who John Mayall was, these guys had these huge record collections. They started this little blues thing at the Crawdaddy Club that happened. And after they did their little thing and blew out, the young guys came through. The Yardbirds came through. Fleetwood Mac came through. We had the big three, Jeff Beck, Clapton, Jimmy Page. You know what I mean? But the thing that the electrified thing turns into something incredible. We get to 66, 67, you know, then we get into Hendrix, and we do get into the Cream, where it really gets electrified and gets big. Where's the transition come from?
At those times you just mentioned, 66, 67, that's when amplifiers started getting bigger and louder. And that's when some of the effects that those guys started using came around. Those were just the tools that they had at the time. And when they started doing shows, you can imagine, I want to get up there and I want to do something bigger. I want to do something louder. I want to do something different.
Energy.
They still wanted to play the blues, but they wanted to put their own mark on it.
And where the energy comes from, for me as a bass player, is the drummers. Because, you know, we'll have Sam Lay playing a shuffle, you know, and we get Charlie Watts, and then we get Ginger Baker.
Yeah, well, those guys played wilder. See, those times were wilder. So the set of drummers you're talking about, Ginger Baker, Mitch Mitchell, another one.
Right.
Being able to be there and have somebody like Jimi Hendrix that's going to let you play what you can play. First of all, the sky was the limit at the time.
Right.
The explosion of that music was not form-wise, but a little bit similar to bebop, where everybody was pushing it out as far as they could. Plus, in England, you didn't have the restrictions of the discipline that you had
Here.
with the tradition being more established
Here.
here. Right.
Yeah.
So you could play wild in a certain way over there that you might get thrown off stage.
Hendrix
over here.
had to go to England to really do his thing. He couldn't get gigs here. He got a few gigs here and he got fired for doing it.
Well, I think there's a fallacy in that because, of course, I worked for Roger Mayer and knew all the guys. And I think there's a fallacy in that. I just think that Hendrix was in the Cafe War in those places, and Kathy Etchingham and Linda Keith, they were in love with him anyway. And they saw something incredible, and those girls, you know, got Keith Richards and everybody, and Chaz Channel and everybody into it. But Bernie touched on something that I think is just incredible: the discipline.
Yeah.
The discipline, because I mean, I know playing bass when I got into all those old records, and it was ready, dum 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 dum, and then when Cream came out, everything got loose. Everything got loose, and that's a great thing about the discipline of the thing.
And environment. Because people were trying to do that probably all over the world.
Right.
But for some reason, there was just a nexus of the sound where there was a nurturing environment for those guys to be able to do that. And then they got acceptance for it.
So out of all those early bands, say the Rolling Stones, the Yardbirds, the Pretty Things, somebody that always gets missed in all this is Van Morrison and Them. These were things that maybe they were trying to imitate the blues bands from America, but for some reason they were hitting it hard. They were losing the discipline, or was it just that they were just putting a youthful vibe on it?
Some of that, sign of the times, anything new that they could do, but I just think having an environment that was really pushing the edge right? Because the way Mitchell played with Hendrix and stuff like that for a drummer, I mean, you couldn't play that. You probably couldn't play that way on a blues record today.
Couldn't play like that on
Yeah,
a blues record today.
you'd be out the door. During those years, 66 to 70, they just blew the doors off, expanded the form, as what was going on in the culture in general.
So if Marshall amps, Muddy Waters, Buddy Guy, and everybody were using Marshall amps, what would have happened?
Buddy does use a bigger amp, and did for a while. I mean,
Right.
he got much louder.
Did it turn into Jimi Hendrix?
You know, Hendrix was a huge Buddy Guy fan.
Yeah.
And then also Buddy Guy became a huge Hendrix fan. I
Right.
think Hendrix had an influence on Buddy Guy.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
How Hendrix loved Buddy Guy, loved the blues, right? And then later on, the guy who influenced him, he influenced him back with his style. I mean, there's nobody more influential than Hendrix.
How much does environment really influence the way these English guys played that music? Remember we were talking about they lived up north? North was industrial. South was, maybe more economically happening than it was up north. But still, the blues the blues in London came from the South. The Humble Pie, Small Faces. Mike, you talked about something today that we know, which is great. How was Humble Pie a blues band?
Well, they were something that nobody had heard before, I thought.
Right.
Some people didn't even know what to think about it.
Right.
Because it was so wild and so out there, but it was great. I mean, that double album was like a classic, one of the classics of all
Rockin'
time.
the Fillmore.
But you're talking about why did this stuff happen? From my standpoint, I'm
Yeah.
not a musician, so
Yeah.
it's different for me.
Yeah.
When I was listening to all this stuff, I'm not listening to anything technical or thinking about that stuff.
Right.
I'm just loving all the music. And I thought at the time that some of the bands that were doing all this stuff maybe were influenced by the fact that it was popular even. Because they're thinking, wow, listen to what's on the radio. If I play that, I can be on the radio. And I can push it as far as I want, which you can't do now. There's no radio presence for that stuff. But back then, I mean, even Frank Zappa, who started as a blues guy, he said, I would never have been signed. All these bands that made it big then, Canned Heat, all these guys never would have been signed. But at the time, they're going, we can take that blues, we can take that hard stuff, and we can do whatever we want. And we got a good chance of at least selling enough records, going on tour, and being on the radio.
Dylan's a good subject to hit on for this because, again, we all listen to Bob Dylan. And how many Bob Dylan songs are based off the 145? I'm sitting here watching the river flow, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody must get down. You know what I mean? How many blues songs did Bob Dylan really do? Bob
Many,
Dylan
many, many.
introduced a lot of blues. You see what I mean? We're always getting about the English side of it. Oh, Led Zeppelin again. But how many songs did Bob Dylan do when he electrified that sound that were based in blues, right, Bernie?
Yeah, Subterranean Homesick Blues.
Subterranean
all of them.
Homesick Blues. Who was the drummers on those records?
He used different drummers all the time.
It didn't really.
Yeah.
It didn't really. He didn't really have a set band, did he?
No.
Over the years.
And I have some friends that worked on Blood on the Tracks. It's one take, you're done.
If
there's a mistake on there, it's there. You know what I mean? Once he got that out, that was it.
Yeah, that's what I liked about Bob Dylan. Me personally, was that I always thought Bob Dylan. Well, I was tour managing a band called the Javelinas years ago. We opened up for Bob Dylan, and my friends were playing in that band. Chris Parker, great drummer, right? G.E. Smith. And I think the thing that Bob said, the times that I got to talk to him, which was just incredible, and one night Van Morrison happened to be there, and he says, oh, I never wanted to be part of this folk thing. It was just something that I did. And then I brought a band on stage, and I couldn't believe it. They says I was playing traditional American blues music, and they didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
I said, well, what was different between playing folk music and now I'm playing blues music?
Yeah, and that's what they did to Muddy when he went electric.
Right.
People went crazy when he went electric.
Why was that?
I think it was the same kind of people. The folk people were purists.
Right.
And so Muddy went electric, and that didn't fit their...
Broke the rules.
Broke the rules, but
that's what brought it back,
we
too,
didn't
right?
all become musicians to
Made it more
follow the
popular.
rules, did we?
No, exactly. Yeah.
Look at him.
That
For every person that hates something, there's a dozen that love it too. So you should do what you want to do, and your audience will find you. And the people who don't like it will go away, and that's it. That's why you just want to do your own thing. And to me, blues is a very improvisational expressive music. That's why I love it.
I thought somebody said blues is a big house and there's room for everyone, right?
Yeah, it should be.
So I
It
mean,
should be.
you could talk about all kinds of people and say, are they blues or not? You guys are the only ones that can answer that.
The Rolling Stones, you know, stayed pretty much true to who they were through even till today.
R&B maybe.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Because I mean, Slim Harpo was a big thing to them, you know. And I mean, after Brian Jones died, I think that influence still stayed in the band because Exile on Main Street, you know, I think is one of their greatest albums. And for me,
Panned
I think,
at the time, though.
pardon me?
It was panned at the time.
Why?
People didn't like it.
Why was that?
I don't know. Never figured it out. Took a long time for that thing to catch on.
Do you think that the Stones were credible because of being blues influenced? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Yeah. Or when you as a DJ played their records, what did you play the traditional records? Did you have to?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Back then, they had certain parameters of music that you could play, but you had a lot of ability to choose your own song. So we were talking on the way
No
here.
program
You don't want to
directors.
follow a really unusual song with something that you never heard before. So you're not going to play like 5 really old, you know, songs that people don't know. You follow with a familiar song. So as long as you did that, you could play an old Howling Wolf song, play the Rolling Stones, play something brand new, and then go back and forth, and people would accept it.
Can't be. I can buzz all night long. Yes, I'm a king bee. I can buzz all night long. Well, I can make a honey baby all night long. Let's buzz.
Having a discussion before, Bernie, about drummers, and you know, because I know you taught me something how to do a stroll, if you remember. Now, where did things like that come from? Stroll. I mean, where did that? Who created that beat, or where was that beat created? Midwest, down south.
That sounds like New Orleans piano.
It's New Orleans
Chubby
piano.
Checker and all of those.
Right,
kind
right,
of
right.
And just that 12/8 feel.
And when John Bonham came on the scene, those guys were basically R&B players that turned into rock players, or was he just loud and that was just his style of drumming?
Well, first of all, he's a gifted individual.
Right.
Right, and he has all the abstract things about drums. Great time. From my ear, I can hear that he's listened a whole lot to like Clyde Stubblefield and Jabo Starks, James Brown's drummer.
drummers.
And on the spacey side, you can tell that he's listened to Elvin Jones and jazz drummers too. Right. But it's just the power that he has, and the fact that they were playing kind of loose that allowed him to construct a lot, and just a tremendous feel.
Right.
You can dance.
You know,
he's true to the form of the blues,
right.
but he's also true to the idea of the blues. Because, I mean, as musicians, we're talking form over and over, but one of the things is the immediacy, the way these people can relate to the now. That's what makes blue-collar people of common everyday experiences, people pouring their heart out, people wearing it right out on their sleeve. And that's part of the idea of the blues.
Right.
And that's what these guys had success at. So like, let's say Eric Burden, who I worked with, he didn't have the same experience as a kid growing up picking cotton in the South.
Right.
But he would tell me a story about playing
in Newcastle.
A little kid in Newcastle
Right.
on the rubble of
Right.
World War II and finding a skull.
Right.
Right. So that was his blues, right?
That was his blues.
I was in Sofia, Bulgaria, and I ran into the blues musician there. They call him the Patch. That's his name. He's the guy that went out when the Russians blew the whole place up, and there's 100,000 people in the street, and the Russian soldiers don't know where they're going. He set up a band, wrote a blues song about overcoming communism, and played it in front of the people until they all went nuts and they sang his song for 3 or 4 days. So as far as their cultural situation being like what an American blues thing is, it wasn't there. But you see, being true to the idea, the immediacy, and the expression, and the trueness.
Because you're talking about, you know, how the blues came about, and as you start to research, you realize that these guys worked all day, 14, 16 hours a day, made $100 a year as a sharecropper or whatever. So at night they get home, what do? They're singing, and they're thinking, I don't even have you know, a stick to play with, whatever. So they started taking cigar boxes and fashioning a neck willing with a knife, whatever, put a piece of baling wire. A lot of times they were one string, which in fact, I think Shapes of Things is played on one string, which is odd. Anyway, so then they started coming up with their own instruments. They were handmade with baling wire. Sometimes they'd have 3 strings. This one has 4. This is a Doyle guitar, Mountain Man Mike Doyle up in Central California.
Bo Diddley. Bo Diddley's guitar was very reminiscent of this.
Well, he may have played one like this when he was younger, and then later on when he got older, he just liked that square shape.
He was just used to it. He was just used to it. Let's get back to America now. Getting back to Chicago again, where Buddy Miles and Electric Flag came from, right? Electric Flag. Who else was there when you were growing up and playing in Chicago blues?
Buddy Guy and Junior Wells
Right.
was almost everybody's favorite band when I was coming up. They just hit it so hard, and they were playing all over. And Muddy would be in town.
Who was in their band? Who was in their band?
I don't even know the names of the sidemen.
These were just
they always
guys
had a hard band.
These guys were just playing, and that was it.
Yeah, they were just doing all the South Side clubs and the West Side stuff, and then Maxwell Street started happening, and then you're in the area of Chicago where everybody's mixing a little bit more, a little farther north, and then they would play, and then the music got expressed to another audience that wouldn't see them.
Especially when the Rolling Stones came over to record in Chess. I mean, there's all those stories and the Yardbirds and everybody. Chicago, New York was a place. Yeah, I'm sure that they went to see Smalls, KO, and all these places. But when they went to Chicago, if I was in the Rolling Stones or the Yardbirds, what club would I be going to see something happen?
Well, when they wanted to see traditional,
60s.
they went down to the Checkerboard,
Right.
or Teresa's, or
right.
Peppers,
Right.
Those were more. Then that's blues.
Was there a great chasm between black and white?
Sometimes yes and sometimes no. I'm 62 now, so I can remember both sides having no-go areas.
Right.
But basically,
I'm talking about playing as well.
Playing one.
Were bands being integrated, or were the Muddy Waters, the Junior Wells bands, and they were playing with the African American, with the brothers in there, or were they hiring a white guy, or no, or that wouldn't happen?
Well, they would hire, right?
Yeah.
But the basic problems with hiring mixed bands that were in Chicago were everywhere.
Yeah.
Right, you know what I mean? The more you got towards society gigs, the more you got towards college gigs, sometimes back then, there would be troubles where you'd have the unfortunate incidents of saying, who can we hire, right? And that kind of stuff, and it was unfortunate. But usually, the bands wouldn't be that way too much. I remember at first, like 63 to 66, I never noticed it that much. Then like 67 to 69, when Chicago became very angry, there was a little bit
Cicero
more,
and all
the
that.
Cicero,
Yeah,
and there was a little bit more separation.
Yeah.
But then luckily, I mean, just basically the late part of the 60s, things were starting to change. But I never took it as the people themselves. I just took it as social forces, right, that made things the way they were. A lot of stress on a lot of people who have very little caused them to see each other as enemies. And it's a very sad thing, but you know, only time can heal those wounds.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Back to that same old place, sweet home Chicago. Steady loaded, baby, now.
I think economics had a lot to do with this, about going back to the English thing, the English side of it, because they felt the blues, because a lot of these kids did not come from, you know, upper caste backgrounds, you know. I mean, maybe Mick Jagger, his parents were, you know, Brian Jones's parents, they maybe were middle class, as we like to call it, but their middle class over there is much different than what our middle class is going to be. Again, Bubba, here's the thing. Evolving from John Mayer, you know, Peter Green, you're familiar with Peter Green?
Absolutely.
Right? Where's the thing where it starts to change blues-wise? I'm sorry, I mean, where the English guys were starting to write, be songwriters. Peter Green, to me, was the first guy that, of course, playing for Santana with the, you know, Black Magic Woman and everything. This is Peter Green song.
Yeah.
But you know, how much did Peter Green influence you as a player?
You know, it's so interesting. I mean, I didn't discover him until later in life.
Right.
You know, Fleetwood Mac to me was rumors. It was the hits, right? I didn't even know.
Right.
And then at some point, somebody put a record on. I'm like, man, that sounds great. Who's that? They're like, that's Fleetwood Mac. I'm like, what? I had no idea. So then I started listening to Peter Green. I'm like, oh my God, where did this guy go? You know, I didn't know, and nobody was really talking about it. I didn't know the story.
Yeah.
I know it now. Apparently, he was in Germany, and some German guy gave him like super massive dose of acid or something. And
Yeah. But they also found a cult called the Children of God.
and those, yeah,
They
that's
also
right.
found a cult of the Children of God. Now, what was the difference between Mick Taylor, Peter Green's guitar playing, and say Peter Frampton? You have, because I want to get back to Peter Frampton.
Yeah.
We spoke about Humble Pie before, and I
Frampton, a lot of people don't know what a great guitar player that guy
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
I mean, he's known for his hits, for the songs that everyone's heard, you know, but he's not known for his guitar playing, and he's a great guitar player.
Right. All of us know what
Yeah.
a great guitar player is was. But tell me the difference between Peter Green and, you know.
To me, Peter is much more pure blues, way deeper in the blues. I mean, you could just tell his inflections and his timing and how he expresses the guitar. I mean, yeah, I definitely admire him over the other ones. It's true.
And when we get into the heavy, because, you know, of course, you know, blues into rock, heavy rock turning into metal.
Yeah, that's
know?
me. I mean, those are the years I grew up. I mean, like I said, in the 70s, I grew up with Cream and Hendrix and all that. It turned into metal. So I'm listening to Green Monolishi by Judas Priest. And then later on, when I discovered Fleetwood Mac and Peter Green, I'm like, he wrote that? I had no idea. I listened to a lot of ZZ Top. I learned to play the guitar playing those licks. And that's all blues, you know.
Big influence. A lot of people.
Big influence.
Again, ZZ Top have been around for many, many, many years, as you and I
Yeah.
well know, and they were huge down south.
Yep.
And then you talk about the Led Zeppelins and everything, and then we think about, well, blues, rock. That was ZZ Top, wasn't
See,
it?
Zeppelin was more like an exploration of blues and rock.
Right.
ZZ Top was like, we're a blues band. We're just going to crank this up and
Right.
play loud, play faster, play louder. It was still blues, though, you know, just really cranked up. But I have come this close to meeting Billy Gibbons at least a dozen times.
Right.
I mean, literally.
It's an experience, I'm sure. I know.
And he's my illegitimate daddy on guitar.
You know, and then
That's
we
the
have,
truth.
you know, guys, and then we have, you know, things like, you know, Terry Reid, of course, you know, who's the greatest, for me, the greatest singer, my friend, Charlie's uncle. Terry Reid, Stevie Winwood,
Oh, yeah.
Spencer Davis. We had all these real blues bands, R&B blues bands and singers, screamers, the white screamers as we call them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because Stevie Winwood, I'm a man,
Yeah.
you know, but
16
not...
years old.
Yeah, 16 years old.
And he was famous because he sounded like a white Ray Charles.
Right.
Back when he was just
And played
playing-
like Jimmy Smith.
Yeah.
And played like Jimmy Smith.
So how would that turn into Traffic and all the other stuff?
How did that turn into Traffic? You see what I mean?
Amazing.
Because everything do,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, it was still blues based. I mean, all this stuff was still blues based, and the blues kind of, besides influencing the rock, got into pop. You know, it might have started off at the, you know, the little you know what I mean, and then it became, as you said before, you said something, Clapton's, which I thought was just the you know, the beautiful line. Clapton said, "Listen, they were not, the Yardbirds were not a blues band anymore. It was a pop band. I want it out."
And went to Mayo.
And he went to Mayo.
Mm-hmm.
And that
And
album.
everybody went to John Mayo.
Everybody went to John Mayo. Everybody.
It's true.
Peter Green, Mick Taylor,
I'm the only one that
John
hasn't.
everybody.
McVie.
John
Yeah.
McVie, they
And
all
later on,
went.
Americans,
Dunbar.
Coco Montoya,
Yeah.
Walter Trout.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, there you go. I mean, John.
When's my turn?
Yeah.
When is,
John Mayo
when is
was
Buddy Whittington
originally-
going to step down?
Was a jazz guy. His dad played jazz all the time.
Yeah,
he lived in a treehouse playing jazz or some crazy
Yeah,
thing when he
their
started
their
serving.
traditional, the English traditional version of playing jazz is not what we call jazz. You know what I mean? They have a very strange take on jazz. You know what I mean? Because I think it's, well, that's just me personally, and I don't want to really get in trouble. But yeah, I do want to get in trouble. Maybe John Dankworth and Cleo Lane were the closest thing to our American version of jazz. You know, like Stan Getz and all that.
Well, you sure look good. Don't be no thanking me. Well, you sure look good. Don't be no thanking me. I got a good shaking, baby. Shake like a willow tree. Well, my baby won't. You know she's fine below. Well, my baby won't. You know she's fine below. I got a good shaking, baby. Shake like a plate of jello.
The blues side of it, guys, turns into this rock pop thing. Definitely turns into heavy metal. The Rock Me Baby version of B.B. King, and then the way Jeff Beck took it. You know what I'm saying? Because we didn't really talk about Jeff Beck in here. We gave Clapton and Page a little bit.
Jeff Beck has played every
Yeah.
different kind of music, mostly instrumental.
Yeah, and you
Kind
know,
of gets lost in there.
yeah, you kind of like
'Cause he
Jeff
doesn't-
Beck.
I
You
love
kind of
Jeff
like Jeff Beck, and I know you like Jeff Beck.
Oh, yeah.
And I love Jeff Beck. You know what I mean? I just
And
think
he doesn't use a pick.
no.
He just uses his fingernails.
Yep.
and his-
I think he uses everything. I think
why
He
don't
really
you
is
play
the
with his
master of the
schwazzle
whammy
if he
bar,
could.
too. He rides the whammy bar constantly. He's the master of the whammy bar.
How did Jeff Beck turn things around? Well, Jeff Beck kind of played, he didn't play the blues side of the Yardbirds. After Clapton left, For Your Love and all the other things Beck did, you know what I mean? And Jimmy Page's contribution to the Yardbirds, I mean, it wasn't as much as definitely Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck really influenced the Yardbirds and guitar players more than any of those guitar players. The big three, as we call them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you feel Jeff Beck fits into the scheme of things? The first Jeff Beck Truth album.
You know what he said? He
especially.
said he was depressed in '62. He didn't want to play music anymore. Then he heard Muddy Waters. He said,
Who was that? Jeff?
Jeff Beck. He
Jeff.
said, my life changed.
Wow.
I can do it now. I can hear that now. I'm going to do that. That's, you know, 'cause he was disillusioned by the whole commercial side of what was happening too.
The big controversy starts, and nobody really gets this, because they don't want to piss anybody else, but I don't care.
You've already done it. So.
Well,
Please,
it
piss
doesn't
those
matter.
people off.
The similarities in the first Jeff Beck Truth and first Led Zeppelin album are pretty intense,
I didn't think of that.
because we have Rock Me Baby, which is called Rock My Plimsoll.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right? And then we have the call and answer guitar. The singer Rod Stewart, rockin' me baby, you know, the call and answer. And then
Superstition.
his best friend, Jimmy Page, decides to make an album, and it sounds just like it, you know?
That's just a coincidence.
It's just a coincidence, yeah. I all these things, as my friend Terry Reed goes, yes, there's all coincidences in life, but these are things that we call artistic borrowing, I suppose. after that, what really kind of interests me about the Led Zeppelin thing, and I think you and I spoke, we had a phone conversation about this, and I'm going to get into this, is how they liberally borrowed riffs from the blues and made them into their own songs, like How Many More Times, which was really How Many More Years.
Yep.
The Lemon Song. And
remember what I said? They were doing a lot what the older blues guys did to each other, too.
Right.
But he didn't give
Taking
anybody
a song
credit.
and
That's
changing.
the problem. He didn't credit anybody,
They
so they
didn't-
didn't get any royalties.
and they got
on
caught,
any of
finally,
it.
they got
Yeah,
caught.
many times. And now they're going through it with Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah, like we were talking about In the Pines, Black Girl and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
How, say it, Bubba, because I could say it, but I like the way you say it.
Well, I was going to say, do you really think that back in the day there, when they were making that music or those songs, when it got down to the creditation part, you think that those guys really thought a lot about that?
No.
I don't think so. Those guys were going 1,000 miles an hour. They
Yeah.
were rock stars,
Yeah, but I think the managers had a big say in that. The manager said, listen, I don't care where you got it from, we're putting it out. It's now selling 10 million copies. Let them come after us. We've got that's what we got lawyers for. And of course, the great story, again going back, is Eric Clapton and Jack and Ginger when they did I'm So Glad, written by Skip James. And Eric Clapton, when Robert Stigwood, asked them, who wrote that? Well, what's that about? We're doing the credits. And he said, oh, a guy named Skip James. He says, well, who's he? Oh, blues guy. And he says, well, we've done some. He says, what do you mean you're not going to pay him? What do you mean you're not going to pay him? Clapton, of course, was being a purist. And what did he turn around and say? He said, oh, we're going to pay Skip James. Skip James tells the story that when he got his first check from I'm So Glad, from the Fresh Cream album and the other Goodbye Cream, it saved his life.
Yeah, a lot of those guys, the British blues guys definitely deserve credit for saving a lot of those guys' lives.
Right.
They started as soon as they had tours and they could hire those guys to open for them, they would take them on the road. They gave those guys a second life. A lot of those guys went home and had got jobs and they quit playing. They weren't making any money. And those guys reinvigorated their careers, gave them new lives, and in subsequent years, a lot of they've resolved or kind of settled all the money issues where they didn't have rights to their own stuff. They've tried to make good. Zeppelin just put out a new gigantic remastered everything box set of these things called CDs that I think people still play.
I think they still buy.
People still buy them.
As the,
And they've given the proper credit on those songs, But getting back to what I was saying before, older blues guys would take a song and change a few words and give it a slightly different title, and boom, they say that's my song. Well, Led Zeppelin did kind of the same thing. So yeah, it's not right because 95% of the song was the same, but they were kind of copying what those other guys had done.
the white blues, New York, Cooper, Bloomfield, getting back to all this. These drummers, these white drummers that we had that were playing, Allman Brothers. We touched on this because I know we all love the Allman Brothers. If we have to give the Allman Brothers the props in this. Again, the English get everything, but then we forget, oh, there was a band called the Allman Brothers, right? A guy named Dwayne Allman. Mm-hmm. Butch Trucks and J-Mo.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Excellent, excellent.
How? Talk about them. Talk about those two. What they brought to the game.
Well, they had a southern style that they were playing from the southeast, and they just got together. And Dwayne Allman was basically boss hogging the whole thing, and they just made some grooves that you couldn't believe.
But two drummers. How does that work? Two drummers. First of all, and people see the Grateful Dead with two drummers, Doobie Brothers. How does the Allman Brothers? How does that work rhythmically? I mean, because they're not playing the same thing. What are they actually doing?
They're just complementing each other. Actually, there's more two-drummer traditions than you would expect. A lot of Motown also has two drummers on it, so it's not that rare. But just the way they played, the drive that they had, and the fact that the music was fluid, would let two people playing different parts together at the same time.
Hey, who can handle two drummers in the same band? What crazy person decided, hey, let's get two drummers in this band? Seriously, man.
Yeah.
Female
And
singers.
what stage am I going to put that on? I couldn't put 2 drummers on 90% of the places I play. I couldn't fit 2 drummers on even if I wanted to.
So guys, we all agree that yeah, the English brought incredible things to the fore with their side of blues and rock. But we have to always give credit to the people that we've spoke to today about, you know, Allman Brothers, Mike Bloomfield.
How about the Doors?
Stevie Ray
Flag
Vaughan.
Doors, Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Edgar and
What about-
Johnny Winter.
Edgar and Johnny Winter.
You see,
Yeah.
Stevie Ray Vaughan came later, unfortunately, but I have to we go back to what Bernie said, Texas. you
For a
know,
long
Johnny
time, it
Winter.
was Johnny Winter.
Yeah.
True.
Johnny
He was
Winter
the man.
Was the
Year
real
after
guy.
year.
Yep.
ZZ Top, Johnny Winter, Texas. There's
Doesn't Chuck Berry fit in there anywhere?
Well, of course, yeah, he does. But you know,
They haven't
again,
even
Chuck Berry
mentioned
was
him.
really a rock and roll. You know, he was the rock and roll guy. But if it wasn't for him, Chess Records would have closed its doors a long time ago. You know, I mean, the movie Cadillac Records shows that. That was Chuck Berry.
And he does have a great blues feel. He's a great blues player.
You know, we could go on for hours for this, but I think we went a little bit more in depth than I see most blues programs that talk about this subject, because Bernie brought a lot of history to it, you know, from the rhythmic side, because I never see drummers on any of these shows that ever talk about, you know, the drumming side of it. It's just like, oh, it's a second. Nobody talks about the bass playing side of it, but who cares? But thanks, Bubba, for coming today, and Mike Ritto, thank you for...
You're the man, Chico.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Never heard
thank
that
you very
before,
much,
have
And
Chico.
thank you all very much for tuning in. We'll see you soon.
Have you ever been mistreated? Well, you know just what I'm talking about. Have you ever been mistreated? Girl, you know just what I'm talking about. I worked for 5 long years for one woman, and she had the nerve to put me out. I got a job in steel mill, chucking steel just like a slave. For 5 long years, every Friday, I came straight home with all my pay. I've been abused and mistreated. Girl, you know just what I'm talking